and welcome to the Infinity Bros podcast, the only podcast that's perfectly balanced, as all things should be. My name is Isaac Edlin. I am going to be your host tonight, and we have with me one other Infinity Bro, Zayne Ellis. Zayne, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing?
I'm doing great. We just got done playing a couple rounds of Battlefront 2, so that was some fun.
Always a good time.
I actually appreciate that we did it not on Supremacy, because I feel like I've been playing that more so, and those games just never end, dude.
Oh, yeah, that gets really tough.
You can play a game for like an hour and still not be done with it. It's like, oh man. But the modes that we were playing, I think, were definitely more fun. So
yeah, that's kind of what we've been settling into the groove on. Because yeah, the Supremacy, like, you got to push back to the ship, and like, oh man, if you don't get it, you're going back down to Earth, and you got to win this round again. Yeah, some of those games, you're in there for an hour, and you're like, this is still the same game. I just want to be done.
You just go back and forth, and yeah, it's rough sometimes. But when you're doing it with friends, it's all good.
Exactly. It's always a good time.
All good. But we are not here to talk about Star Wars. No. We're here to talk about something else. This is a special bonus minisode where Zayne and I are going to be reviewing Spider-Man Miles Morales, the new game that just came out a couple months ago on PS5 launch. And Zayne and I both were able to acquire it, and we actually both have PS5, so we can even give maybe a little mini review of our PS5s as well. But yeah, we're super pumped to talk about this game. Both Spider-Man fans, right, Zayne?
Oh, absolutely.
So I'd say we're probably the biggest Spider-Man fans in the Infinity Bros. I'd say we're up there.
Yeah, I think we'd put Jared up there as well, but
yeah, Jared's gotta be up there. Max is into the Spider-Verse fan.
That's true.
He loves that movie. That's for sure. But we're going to get into it right away with our segment of Get to Know an Infinity Bro.
Classic Isaac and Zayne mess around.
Yeah, let's go. All right, so the question that I'm going to ask today for Get to Know Infinity Bro is, Zayne, what was your first exposure to Spider-Man? Your first memory of Spider-Man? Like, what got you into it? So I'll let you go ahead and go first.
That's an in-depth, because even as I was sitting here, like, just as we logged off Battlefront, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, man, what is my first experience? Like, as I'm thinking back on it, and I'm kind of drawing to like three points of, and actually all three different media, but my first exposure to comic books was Spider-Man. The first comic book I ever read was a Spider-Man comic book, and I remember it because I didn't know, I knew about comic books, but I know where to get them. I didn't have any comic book shops near me. And so I went to the library, and just the minimal selection of comic books they had, one of them happened to be one of the old school Spider-Man omnibus. So one of the big, thick, just tons of Spider-Man pages. And so I was like, yeah, Spider-Man's kind of cool. And so all this was happening around the same time of the first Spider-Man movie coming out. So there was hype there because I was 10, and you're like, this is awesome. I had this exposure from the library of, reading this comic book. And then at the same time, I don't even remember like what prompted it. I don't know, maybe because the hype from the movie. But back in the day, like when you got cereal boxes, sometimes like it would come with like a demo in it, and it came with a demo of a PC version of the Spider-Man video game.
Oh, wow.
And all it was
awesome.
Was like the first level of the Spider-Man game. And I installed that, and that was my first exposure. Like, this is awesome. This is the coolest game ever. I played that so much, and it was literally just the first level.
That is hilarious.
Just this demo. And I played that so much.
Kids these days will never know the joy of opening something from a cereal box.
Right.
Man.
I think back of all the cool stuff. Like
we had so much good stuff.
You get all the Star Wars, the lightsaber spoons.
Oh, yes. The lightsaber spoons. Oh, my
all the
gosh,
different things like that.
amazing.
You're just like, yeah, what happened to that? Yes. Why don't they bring those back?
Oh, my goodness. That is a throwback, man. That's awesome. The one I was thinking of was, you mentioned the demos. Like, they always had, like, little demos. I remember they had a home run derby, and
Oh, yep.
you could collect like 6 different discs
Yep.
that had different players to play the home run derby on. And I played those for hours. I mean, I was like I think you were too, Zane. I was a PC player back in the day. So I would just sit and, I mean, if my mom didn't pull me off of the computer, I'd be sitting and playing those games for just hours.
Oh, right. And like that was the only exposure, because even growing up, I mean, that was the only like video games we had, is the computer. Like my parents weren't, video games weren't, a big thing or whatever, and they didn't have. We didn't have any of that growing up until we got a little bit older. Right. So it was just the computer. And so, I
same.
remember many of afternoons of playing computer games from, Age of Empires and Stronghold.
Oh, yes.
Played a lot of those because my mom always had a thing of we could sell her on like being able to play a video game if we could tie into some like knowledge or like a historical context to it. And so we're like, oh, Age of Empires. Like,
right.
Oh, you're paying
Risk. I mean.
Right. Like Stronghold. Like, come on, you're learning.
Oh my gosh.
So we totally found ways to sell games like that. And
absolutely.
Then me and my brother, that's also when we first started discovering how to kind of work the system a bit, because we'd always play Madden as well. And I remember it was Madden 2002.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
We had it on the computer.
2002, man.
Yep.
Dante Culpepper.
Yep, right on the cover. And
that was a good one.
I always played on the keyboard, and then my brother had like a had a controller, and so we'd always play against each other. And
I think we've talked about this on a previous minisode, Zane, because I remember playing with my cousins, and we would share the keyboard. Like one person would have one side of the keyboard, and one person had the other side.
We never had it like that. Like I got the keyboard to myself, but. We always, because my mom was always like, okay, you can each play for an hour. So we like, well, we're playing together, so we're going to use my hour, and then Austin, we're going to use your hour. So together, that's 2 hours, but we're just sharing the hours.
Yes.
It made sense in our young minds, but
absolutely,
it didn't always fly with
That's
Mom.
how you work the system, man.
Exactly.
That's how you work the system.
Like, no, we're playing on Austin's hour right now.
Ugh. That is awesome. I never got a chance to play the old Spider-Man games. So if they show up on Steam or something at some point, that'd be kind of fun to go back and play those old games.
If you don't have the nostalgia to be rough, because graphically, oh my goodness, they are.
True. I'm sure the graphics are rough at this point for sure.
They're bad. But like because I think it was technically like the Spider-Man. I think it was also the one on the 64. It was the version that I had for the PC as well, I think. Or maybe like PS1, I don't remember. But it was one of the old ones. I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. Right. I love Spider-Man.
Yeah, same dude. So, in light of that, my first exposure to Spider-Man was Spider-Man the Animated Series from the 90s. We didn't watch a lot of TV growing up, but I remember catching a couple episodes when we were like, it must have been at my like grandma's house or something like that, and I was like, this is awesome. I remember seeing Mysterio on one of the episodes, and I was like, this is so
like,
cool.
Who is this guy?
This guy could just disappear. Like, what is going on? Spider-Man obviously is kicking butt, and I kept watching a couple episodes, and I ran into the arc about Lizard. Ooh. Which is, I mean, because of that arc in the animated series, Lizard is my favorite Spider-Man villain. The dude, they did not do him justice in Amazing Spider-Man, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It would be fun to see a live-action Lizard at some point that is a good one. But, man, like, I fell in love with the animated series, and further on through childhood, just with, like, merchandise. I remember having a ton of Spider-Man coloring books. I don't know why that sticks out to me, but like I would just use those for hours, just coloring in all the different Spider-Man pictures and all the villains and stuff like that. So much fun. And I think I had a couple action figures. Not like I wasn't a big action figure kid. My brother was super into like action figures, so I think he might have had a couple Spider-Man ones, But yeah, and then like you said, when the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi Spider-Man series went out, That's what really got me
Yo.
into Spider-Man. I think I might have read a couple comics before that, but I wasn't a big comic reader either in my childhood. But man, when those Raimi Spider-Man movies came out, I was all in.
Right,
I was
like this
Spider-Man
is the coolest
is
thing
the
I've ever
best.
seen.
Yeah, right. Ugh, so good. And this is maybe going into my nostalgia of Spider-Man 3. Like, obviously, it's not a great movie, and it was kind of a bummer of an ending to that trilogy. But I remember watching that for the first time, and I was like, this is awesome.
Right.
Like, they had Venom in it.
Right.
They had
Sandman.
Sandman.
Yep.
It was such a cool movie. And yeah, I mean, I do remember watching him doing his like Saturday Night Live strut down the street, and I was like, okay. Even at whatever age it was, it
This
must
is
have been like
corny.
13 or 14. I was like, okay.
Right, like, okay.
But the rest of the movie was
it was awesome. You're like, this is
like,
climactic, like, you're just throwing all this stuff at
Right,
you. You're
yeah.
like, oh my goodness, what is going on?
Man, yep. The nostalgia for Spider-Man 3 is strong. So that's why I have such visceral reaction to people who trash it.
It's weird, too, for whatever reason, some of the nostalgia I have for that movie isn't even for the movie itself. Remember, for whatever reason, when they promoted it, Burger King promoted the crap out of Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
And there were some places that even had like the Venom burger where the bun was like dyed black.
Yep. And they brought that back. It was for the Venom movie. They brought that back again too.
And like I part of that
that.
nostalgia was remember all the promo material and like all the fry boxes and all their stuff had Spider-Man stuff, and that's one of my memories too of just like the Sunday after church or whatever, we went to Burger King and we're just eating, and that's a memory that sticks with me of all the Spider-Man promo stuff because it's around the time we watched it, and just
well, and those are like our informative years too. I mean, we were in like middle school, because that was now I got to look up when that date was. It must have been
the first one was 2002, so
2008 or 9 or something. No, it was earlier.
It's got to be earlier than 9. Yeah, maybe 2007.
Yeah, because 9 would have been when I graduated high school. 2007.
Yep.
Yeah, like sophomore. You would have been. When did you graduate? You would have been like
10,
a junior.
So 2007.
So you would have been a freshman.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, that was like, informative. Like, I mean, we didn't know what a good movie was
right.
at that point.
It's just like, this is so cool.
It's a superhero. It's Spider-Man. He's facing Venom. Like, Venom was awesome at that point as well. Like, he was up there with my favorite villains, and yeah, now looking back on it, Topher Grace definitely wasn't the right casting for that, but like, at the time it didn't matter. It was Venom. I didn't care. I don't know. Sony dropped the ball on Spider-Man 3, unfortunately, but the nostalgia is strong for that movie. I think
what's weird though about it is, as much we talk about Venom, it totally overshadows how good of a villain Sandman was in that movie.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that was one of those first
exposures
to, like you said, on the formative years, that you had a good sympathetic villain. Like, you understood his plight.
Yeah, exactly.
And you understood why he was doing what he was doing. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm mad at Spider-Man. Like, he legit had a reason for what he was doing.
Yeah, and that was like almost new in kind of in the earlier years of superhero movies when they're really getting going. So I mean, that was kind of a fresh concept at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely cool. And man, the way they like retconned Uncle Ben's death into Spider-Man 3 and had, Hayden Christensen Church like in that, involved in those scenes and stuff, that was so
had
cool.
So much more of an impact. Yeah,
it really did. Yeah. So the good parts of Spider-Man 3 definitely outweigh the really cheesy parts for me.
It's just the cheesy stuff sticks a little more. That's what you end up remembering. But then when you think about it, you're like,
we got some gold memes and gifs out of those. Right. So I mean, we can't really complain. About it.
That's true.
So some deep nostalgia between both of us
for sure.
For Spider-Man.
Most definitely.
And I know for me, Spider-Man's always been my favorite superhero. So these games are like a no-brainer. Spider-Man PS4 is top. It's definitely top like 3 favorite games of all time. Its contested argument could be made for number 1 for me. when Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales was announced earlier this 2020. It was announced early in 2020. My mind was blown because it was only 2 years after Marvel's Spider-Man was released, which, I mean, for a video game, development turnaround is pretty quick.
Right.
And granted, it is a shorter game, but man, I was like, my mind was blown when they announced that. I was like, this is amazing. And that trailer was fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
My hype was just off the charts for Spider-Man Miles Morales.
Right. And I think part of that too was what you had from the Spider-Man game, the first one. It was so well done, so well crafted. As soon as you got that trailer, it was one of those things you were immediately like, yes. Like there was no doubt in your mind that I'm ready for Miles Morales. Like you're ready. It's one of those sequels that like, this was, the first one was so good. We're going to just hit the ground running right on the next one. And so as soon as you got that first, taste, like, hey, this is what we're doing on the next one, it's like, all right, give it to me. I'm already ready. I'm pre-ordering right now.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yep. And I kind of held off on pre-ordering because I didn't pre-order PS5, and I didn't know like when I'd be able to get a PS5. And so I held off on the pre-order of Spider-Man, and eventually I was just like, I can't wait. I have to buy this for my PS4 because I can't sit here and wait for everybody else to play this game and me hear all the spoilers
I need to play
and all
it,
that stuff. Like, I need to play this game. So I ended up buying it for my PS4, played I think about 75% of the game, and then luckily they have cross save, so when I got my PS5 I was able to transfer my save over to my PS5. But man, this game is fantastic. So we are going to get into a pretty detailed review, so we're going to give you guys a spoiler warning. If you have not played Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales and you're planning to, I would say probably just skip this episode and come back when you're ready for it, because I mean, we're going to be going through pretty much everything that goes in this very short campaign, and we don't want you to be spoiled if you don't want to be. So another thing we're going to do is we're going to go over our review and rating probably towards the end of the minisode here of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. So if you are not familiar with our rating system, we're going to play that right here.
Here on the Infinity Bros podcast, everything is ranked from a 0 to 6 point scale. 0 meaning horrible, and 6 meaning absolutely excellent. If all of the Infinity Bros rank something a 6, it gets an infinity step.
So Zayne, Miles Morales. We'll save the ratings for the very end of it, but like, what were your initial thoughts like when this game was coming out? Like, obviously we already mentioned the hype was high, and you pre-ordered a PS5, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so you had it. Did you have the game on launch too? Because you pre-ordered the game, or did you just?
Well, no, I ended up waiting off on the pre-order too because I was like, I just want to get it on the PS5. So I just waited till I got my. So I didn't technically, because it came out a little bit before the PS5 came out, I think, if I remember right. But I was like, I don't want this.
Yeah, it was within the same week.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't want this on my PS4. Like, I'm just PS5, and as soon as I got my PS5 like fired up, that was the first thing. I went to the store, bought it, got it downloaded. Like, I was like, this is gonna be my first game that played through on the PS5.
Yes.
And yeah, so I was hype about it. Like, I was super excited that was gonna be like the launch title on the PS5, and I was like, I'm all in.
Yes,
that's the game I want.
That is like, that's the game that gets people to buy PS5s.
Right.
Granted, there were not many launch titles. Like, there's not many games, and they made a lot of the games like cross generational. So, like I mentioned, I played my Miles Morales on my PS4. So, I mean, maybe that dampened the hype of getting it on your PS5, but still, like, this game was so good that you wanted to play it on a PS5.
Right.
And like, so many things were coming out about the remastered Spider-Man as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have, the ray tracing. You can go like 60 frames per second. They have like a performance mode. They have a lot of different options to basically make the game like more smooth and more beautiful than on your PS4. And I was just pumped for all of that. So when I finally ended up purchasing it, I bought the Ultimate Edition, which includes the remastered Spider-Man. So that's next up
for sure
on my playthrough list, because again, that was one of my favorite games of all time. Super pumped to play through that one
Right.
again. And I think there's even a different platinum for the remastered version from what I've been hearing. So
That would make sense, because usually, a lot of times when a game gets a remaster, it'll get another platinum on it.
right.
Just for
so
slightly
I
different
might,
stuff.
I might, if I'm playing through it and I am feeling it, I might go for the double platinum on that
There
one.
you go.
Because that, again, it's a fantastic game. If you
Absolutely.
haven't played Spider-Man PS4, go check that out. It is an amazing game. But I'm assuming, since you all are listening to this minisode, you have probably played through Marvel Spider-Man and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. So, Zane, the first thing we come upon in Miles Morales is it kind of picks off a little bit, like slightly after Spider-Man PS4. It basically is like he's learning to use his powers. It's not like immediately afterwards, because he is a little bit skilled in his powers. But when we pick it up at the beginning, Peter is teaching him how to use, he's basically going through spider training, and he learns how to use his venom powers like right away in the beginning, which is his bioelectric powers basically. So for those of you guys who aren't familiar with Miles Morales, this might have come as a little bit of a surprise to you guys. But man, it was really cool to see almost an origin story, because we didn't really get that in the first Spider-Man, which I was actually okay with.
Right.
But what did you think about the whole starting, almost coming of age story in this game?
Yeah, like I liked how it just kind of, it didn't really bog it down. Like they didn't have a ton of exposition. Like they were just like, okay, this is coming right off of what you had from the first one. We're gonna hit the ground running. Has it established that he's kind of been hanging around? He's been getting his lessons from Peter. Yeah, he's decent. He's got some skill, but like he's not like fully refined. And like you see that right away, in those first few fights. And I always like kind of you kind of get, as it moves along, to kind of introduce you on stuff. It sets the story, introduces you to the mechanics and stuff. And so I thought it was a good way to, just get the ball rolling on the game, get stuff established.
Right.
Just give you enough of the headcanon and just, all right, roll with it.
Right. And it was a perfect way to do the tutorial.
Right.
With Peter, setting up all those like challenges around the city for Miles to complete, So that was kind of a cool little thing. And one thing that I thought was really cool was that they didn't have Peter in this story.
Yep.
Like he was right in the first boss fight when they faced Rhino. And he actually got his butt kicked and Miles saved him, which was really cool. And then he just ducks out. Like he's off to, I forget the country that he goes to with MJ, but he's like taking pictures for us in some other country. And Miles is by himself. He's like taking care of New York as Spider-Man by himself. And it's just really cool that, I mean, this is Miles's game. This isn't a Spider-Man sequel. This is Miles Morales. And I thought that was really cool that they just like straight up gave Miles a game.
Yeah.
It would have been easy to have Peter in there and like do missions as Peter and do other cool things as Peter, maybe even have, switch characters and stuff, and maybe they'll integrate that in the Spider-Man sequel. But I thought it was really cool that they just straight up gave him his own game. The coming of age story was just really cool through that. So, and another like note on the learning stuff, they did such a great job. The game itself is smooth as butter. The game itself is amazing. But they did a great job at making Miles just like kind of, I mean, he's an awkward teenager.
Yep.
That's who he is. When he's swinging, he kind of like loses control. If you go too fast, if you like swing up and let go of the web right away, like he kind of, his arms are waving, and like they did a really good job of showing that like he's learning.
Right,
this,
exactly.
Like,
that's something that I really enjoyed, because you pick up on that right away, and like it, especially as you're like playing from like the first one, Peter's movements are so refined and he's agile and very. But then you come in Miles, and you can actually get that sense of not only is you're swinging around, but in your fighting. Like there's a little bit of that awkwardness. Like he's not fully, like he's still got the cool moves and everything else. Yeah, but it's still not like that super refined. It's the same, but it's just enough to be Miles' own fighting style, Miles' own swing style.
Right.
Like, it's Spider-Man and what you got from the first one, but they also made it unique enough to Miles Morales that it wasn't just like copy and paste of what you had playing the first game. Like, it was just unique enough to be his own. And I thought that added a lot of characteristic to the game. It really brought it more home that this is Miles Morales. This isn't Peter.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, I mean, he defeats Rhino and saves Peter in the first scene, and then they go on and, I mean, he meets Simon Kriegler, who is the head of Roxxon Corporation, and they kind of end up being one of the big bads in the whole game. And, you know, you keep going further on down the line, and you meet Finn Mason, who is Miles Morales' like childhood friend, who he did all these science projects with. She's basically really smart, and you find out that she is the Tinkerer, which, okay, so Zane, how familiar are you with like the Ultimate like universe and comics and stuff like that?
Not super. I mean, I've seen a little bit, but like I'm not super versed on it.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much on the same page as you. So when I saw this and like she shows up, and obviously like we as comic book fans, we know that Phineas Mason is the Tinkerer,
right,
who is an old white guy in the comics. But like you see her name and you're like, wait a minute. Okay. All right. So us comic book fans, we kind of know what's coming, even though like you don't really see that in the story until about halfway through, because I mean you're discovering as Miles, you're discovering what is going on with like kind of the shady dealings of the Roxxon Corporation. And okay, so this is the part that I didn't know. Like I don't know much about the Ultimate Universe, so I don't know if Phineas Mason is, you know, a young black woman in the Ultimate comics, but I love the twist. I was like, yeah, get old white Tinkerer out of here. We don't need that guy. Like this is a really cool twist on the story. And I don't know if this even is a twist, because maybe it's that way in the Ultimate comics.
See,
I'm not exactly sure.
I'm not entirely sure on that either. I think for whatever reason, there's something in the back of my mind that's telling me that, like, I don't know if Tinker was ever established in the Ultimate Universe. Like, this was, they took the idea from, you know, the main 616. They were like, we want this in Miles' story. And so they tweaked it for the game. Because I don't think that was technically in, or the Tinkerer might have been, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm not super knowledgeable on Ultimate Universe. But yeah, the way they did it, they set it up. They gave that story to it. They gave that connection. And again, it just goes to show how they're like, well, no, this is Miles' game. And we're telling Miles' story. And just the way the connection they had and the way they established it. So yeah, I was just like, this is the Tinkerer. Like, this is Finn. Yeah. Like, this is Miles' villain right here. Like, this is how it works. Like, I'm fine with it. Yeah, so
I'm actually reading here that in the Ultimate Universe, he is a young guy. Oh. So they did switch some stuff around, which I'm like totally fine with, because, and Marvel has been doing this lately too. I mean, they're like drawing off of the MCU and a lot of their content and other media for their comics. Like they're integrating all of that stuff into their comics. And actually, Jarrett threw this in our Infinity Bros group chat a while back. The Mr. Fantastic now in the comics, the dude looks like John Krasinski, who has been fan cast as Mr. Fantastic for a long time, probably like, I don't know, 5 to 6 years or something like that. People have been calling for that. Like, that is amazing that whoever's writing these comics and illustrating these comics is like, all right, let's get in on this. Like,
we'll get in on this trend. Cool. Why not?
Yeah, so, but I thought that was a really cool way to make it, like you said, like make it Miles' game. Right. This is somebody he knows as a childhood friend who becomes a villain and somebody he has to defeat to, you know, ultimately save New York. Right. So I thought that was awesome. So Zane, did you have any specific things that you did not like about the game?
Like nothing. Like I can't necessarily say like from an aspect of disliking. Like it took some getting used to the like from the Tinkerer and like that underground game, the whole concept of like the hard light weapons they used, that was just a little odd because it just seemed, I don't want to necessarily say
like they could just like manifest whatever they were
right,
thinking
like it just
kind of thin air.
it seemed more far-fetched just because
Yeah, right. I can definitely see that.
just because you didn't have as much, like I guess you put some of it to like suspension of belief. Like you never necessarily saw anything in the game or in that universe of saying that like why this technology is here, but you're also like, well, this is Spider-Man, then like the villains don't always make sense. Like, of course, they're gonna have crazy gadgets, and you're also going from this established stuff of like she's a genius, she's super smart. They have the energy stuff they're working, from Roxxon. Her brother was a genius, so he had some take you through baby steps of explaining like where that came from. And at first you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. But then as you play, you just got used to it. Like it was just kind of, oh, well, this is just run of the mill. Here's your bad guys. And this is what they have for their weapons. And it was like,
yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
And then it did fit kind of as you went on with kind of the theme they were going for of just I don't know if you picked up on it, but as you play, the way they use color in this game, and like the brightness and the contrast, like not only do you have the whole, like, it's set on Christmas and you got lights and the way the shine, like, and they use so much of that with like the way stuff reflected off of Miles's suit, and then you got them with the different, like the purple of the hard light and so like the way they use just the light and the reflection in the game, like it made it its own unique experience, because you were like, as you're sitting there fighting, you're kind of like looking at these lights and you're like, well, I know I'm in the middle of a fight, but this looks really cool.
Like that's true. That's true. Definitely. It definitely felt like its own game, which was amazing.
For sure.
Like that was definitely a plus, because I was slightly worried about that going into it, that it was going to be kind of just a spin-off, per se, which it is. But I mean, he could get a legit sequel out of this game. This isn't just like a one-time thing. Like, this game was so good that I definitely could absolutely see them making a sequel for it, and maybe even a full-length sequel. Like, I'd love to see a full-length sequel.
I feel like the way Insomniac wanted to do it is that with the game one, you got Peter's story, and then, but not only did you get Peter's story, you also got part of Miles's story, because like you had everything that happened, with Miles.
Right. You like see his origin in that movie.
And I feel like that's part why this game was a little shorter, is because you already had some of Miles, and so now like you have this much of what you had with Spider-Man and Peter, and then you introduce Miles, and you keep running that, and then this is a little shorter because now you've had this established with Miles. So now I think in our next game, there's no like, oh, there's two Spider-Man. You can go in the next game. Like, you don't necessarily have to go
That's true.
A sequel to Spider-Man. You don't need a sequel to Miles Morales. Like, now you just go, we're just making Spider-Man games.
Okay,
and so now it doesn't matter.
I'm in on that, right, honestly. Like I like that idea.
Whether you have Peter, whether it's Miles, moving forward, it's just Spider-Man. Because you
don't necessarily have to be focused on two different franchises. Like, then you can just potentially interchange, who you're playing as, and that would be pretty cool.
I mean,
okay, I'm in on that.
Even give it a game of where you have both, and then they both have their own set of, so like, let's say you're playing as Miles or Peter, and then which one you're playing as, say you're given a mission, maybe it could play out differently as who you're playing as, or you have the establishment of both these characters that now you can continue forward on. I like it from the aspect too that since they established Miles as his own thing and Peter's like, you're also connecting their villains separately, and I think that sets up now that you can bring that together. So, like, it would be sweet, you're bringing back, Vulture or Elektra or, any of those villains you fought in the first game. Well, I want to fight those guys as Miles. For real. But, like, they didn't, like, separate those as, like, well, no, this is Miles' story, this is Peter. Like, they brought it together. So now, like, I could see it in another game of, like, well, you're going to get to a point maybe where, You get that in a mission where, Peter's gotten his butt kicked. Now you do have to come in as Miles, and now you do get to face Doc Ock, or you just get the difference that you get to run this with Miles. Like, they've set up and created so much more story that it's not just Peter's story and it's not just Miles' story. It's Spider-Man's story, whether it's Peter or Miles.
Yeah, dude. I'm all in. I love your idea, man. I think that would be fantastic you would think that they're already in somewhat of production for the sequel to Spider-Man. So, because, I don't know, just because this game was shorter and it came out in 2020, would you think that the sequel for Spider-Man would be coming out in about 2022 or 23? Or is that too early, do you think?
I could see it. It all depends. I don't know. Obviously coming off with everything with COVID and everything, of how it's been working on. Because I feel like they always want to keep going, bigger and more, and just keep, pushing the boundaries on this. But, I knew, Sony's onto something where they're like, hey, we need to buy Insomniac. And so, they can give it the money, they can give it the focus, they can keep, pumping. So, I could see something in, maybe 2023. I think that it's a decent timeline of what the games have come out, because you've already established everything. You have stuff built. You now have the PS5, which you built Miles Morales to run on. So you kind of have that sample to build off of for your next game. It's not like you're completely building something new. And so, I could see that as fitting a timeline.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of going back to the negative things about this game. There weren't many. I absolutely loved this game. Kind of the only thing that I think they could have added was they just didn't have that many villains, and it is due to the short nature of the game. Unfortunately, I think, but it would have been fun to have throw some more villains in there as side missions that don't necessarily, because the main story was good. Even though it was short, I didn't feel like it was too short, they did a great job on the main story, but I did miss not having a ton of villains that I had to fight, it seemed like I was just fighting goons most of the game. And then even Finn honestly didn't feel like that big of a fight at the end. Rhino was a little bit of a boss fight or whatever, but I kind of missed boss fights, honestly. There just wasn't that many big villains in this game. So I was kind of bummed about that. But other than that, this game was amazing, and so man, I have a hard time finding anything else negative about it, but it would have been nice if they could have thrown in a few more side missions with some different villains or something like that.
But, I can see that side of the argument of wanting more villains. But for me, I think it did so much of adding and creating to Miles' story, and the fact that he's a brand new Spider-Man. He doesn't have villains. He hasn't made the villains yet. You know what and that's what I mean. That's why, with this established that now you have Peter's villains and you got new Miles that you can have him fighting the old villains. You're seeing this creation of not just we have your established with everything with Peter, but you have this new emergence of Miles. And so not only do we get to this game was, the coming of age, if you will, with Miles and watching that progress. But now moving forward, I feel like there's a great opportunity now to see the progression of and creation of villains for Miles. Mm-hmm. We kind of got it. We saw the creation of Doc Ock in the game one. Right. You still had some of the other ones. Yeah, there's not a ton of villains for Miles because he's brand new. No one knows him.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense. And if they had to create villains, then they got to do the whole backstory and origin story and stuff like that. So that would have taken a lot of time, I guess, for a side mission. You would have had to incorporate that into the main story somehow. And how you would have had to do that is you would have had to take an old villain from Peter's, past, and like thrown him in there, and Miles could have been like, "Oh, I heard Peter talk about this guy, blah 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 blah," or something, and had to track down different things throughout the city and then eventually fight him. But yeah, I see that point though, because yeah, you're right. I mean, they would have had to create, if you want to make this Miles's game, you would have had to create another villain for him instead of just taking, because they already did that with Rhino. I mean, they took him from Peter's past or whatever. But it's still, in my eyes, I think I would have liked to see a couple more villains, especially because, I mean, and we will see more in the next Spider-Man game for sure. But man, he's got one of the best rogues galleries out there.
Oh, for sure.
And I can't wait to see what they do with it in the next one. Last thing we want to go over before we give our ratings here, the post-credit scene. Talking about, I don't know if it's fresh in your mind, Zane, but we go back to the Oscorp lab, and Harry is still floating in the tank, right? And he's got kind of the black symbiote organism stuff kind of wrapped around him. And how does it go? He like comes up, or Norman is in there, right? Yep. And he is talking. I mean, he's been, he's had Harry in this tank for who knows how long. He has like some sort of illness, like cancer or something like that, and he's basically trying to slow it down, right?
Well, they're trying to slow it down because if I remember correctly of how they have it established in that universe, because I think you got it in the side stuff, I thought they were doing the whole thing that they were kind of giving him almost like the Flash Thompson route, in that like he was like an astronaut. Yeah. And he was like in space, or he was some experiment, and then came back, and I think that's how you can introduce the symbiote thing.
Yeah.
And like that's why he's in the tank, because they don't know what it is. He's sick. And then then with this, how Norman comes in is like, no, wake him up. And the doctor's there, and it's just like, we don't know if this is gonna kill. Like, we don't know. And how he's just like, nah, wake him up. And you're just like, oh, dang.
And then, actually, the guy that tells him to wake it, that is kind of, like, hesitant about it, he calls him Kurt. So that's probably Kurt Connors.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm down. Like, give me Lizard, give me Venom in Spider-Man 2. Like, this is shaping up to be an amazing game. And if you put Miles in there, too, and give him a couple of his own, like, origin villains to fight, man, the future of Spider-Man is looking good in video games.
Well, like, that makes you wonder, though, because what you have established, so technically, like, we don't have Venom, we don't have Lizard, like, there are some that we don't have, like, since you've kind of created this story with both of them, like, you could almost make those villains as split now. Like, that's not necessarily a Peter villain or a Miles, but like, and that's how the focus of having them go against,
True.
Because, like, they weren't created for one or the other, and then you could bring them in and kind of, there's another creation of a villain,
Right. Well, and yeah, even with the first Marvel Spider-Man, like they tweak stories, they tweak origins. Like Doc Ock in the comics is one of Peter's oldest foes. Like I think he faces them in like the 10th issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Like it's very early. And in this one, I mean, he's already got an established group of villains, and now the origin story of Doc Ock, I mean, happens relatively late in, well, I shouldn't say late, because I think he's actually still only like mid-20s in these games, Peter is. Yeah. But still, like, I mean, he is one of the later established villains in this universe. So it's not like they're, it's not like they're following comics or any other media source to a T. Like they are absolutely able to manipulate and, kind of create whatever type of, environment that they can for Spider-Man and Miles. So like that makes me excited, because like you said, they could do whatever they want with these characters. Well, and they already with the information that we have about, Harry is the one that is potentially going to be becoming Venom. Like, that's already twisting things and stuff like that, which, I mean, as long as they handle the story well, I don't really care.
Right.
As long as you make a good story, sure, throw some different stuff at me, you know, like it's not going to break. I in the movies I do appreciate like comic accuracy, but it's the same thing. Like if you make a good story, you know, I can bend on some things,
right,
as long as it is a good story.
I care more about it, it being a good story. Like it can deviate from the source material as long as it still makes sense and as long as it still fits.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
I guess didn't really hit on it, but then I guess, I mean, we already did spoiler on this, but just with this whole movie of how they flipped everything with Miles' uncle, with the Prowler. Mm-hmm. And I like that, how, I mean, you had enough of a change there. If you don't know on Miles' origin, like his Uncle Aaron's death, that was his Uncle Ben moment in the Ultimate Comics.
Right.
Whereas, but here, like, he didn't know his Uncle Aaron. He's still the whole life of crime, the whole, still the Prowler.
Right.
But it doesn't have that death moment. And I think it was interesting. I think they took that and they gave it to Finn in this instead.
True.
Because
good point.
That's was kind of the same.
You could probably point to his dad dying in Marvel's Spider-Man as well, but like, I mean, he is Spider-Man at this point in this game, so I mean that's definitely another turning point for him as well. So
right, and so like so now you have the establishment, like you still have Prowler, so now does he still go on the route of a good guy? Do they turn him to be a bad guy to give Miles a villain again?
I mean, they give the impression that he's going to, like, at the very end. I think there's another post-credit scene where Miles is, like, kind of coping with Finn's death, and my memory's a little foggy, but they mention that he is in prison, and he's, like, gonna serve his service or do his time or whatever. So I think that might be the route they take, but who knows? Which
would change things again, too, because now you're like, well, I mean, that was a big thing in the comics. That was, also that villain. So you put him in prison. But you're also remembering now who else is in prison. Doc Ock.
Yeah.
Electro.
Yeah.
Well, like,
so many
so
people.
Like, he could be getting exposed. So, like, there's a lot that they could still do for future stories,
That's true. All right, Zane, last thing before our ratings. What was your favorite suit to play in?
Ooh. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I feel like I switched through it. Like, I was like, I play on this one a while. Okay, I'm going to switch. I need to try a different one.
Yeah.
And then, like,
I
just kept...
You got to get exposure through, like, most of them, at least.
Okay, well, my favorite, like, not for the suit itself, not for the aesthetics of it. I loved the cat in the backpack.
Yes.
Like it was
awesome.
a very plain design, whatever. But the fact that when you're fighting and the cat would jump out of the backpack and scratch someone or hit someone, like I was like, that's awesome.
So great.
This is the coolest thing
ever.
A
Spider-Man mask,
and it's got a Spider-Man
so
mask,
awesome.
And it's like as you're flying around, it's like hopping out of the backpack.
Spider-Cat.
I was like, okay, this is clever. I need more of this in my life.
Oh my gosh, it's so great.
From actual suit design of my favorite, I really liked the Miles 2099 suit.
Ooh, yes, that one was
that suit was really that one
great.
Stood out to me. I was like, there's just something about. I mean, I really even like that one in the first one. There's just something about Spider-Man 2099. I'm just like, that's such a cool design.
I know, that made me like wonder about if there is, I'm sure there is in the comics somewhere, but like a Miles version of 2099, that made me wonder. I was like, oh, like I want to know more about this. Like this looks awesome.
And that's why I'm excited to get another Spider-Verse, because they're at the end of that.
Yes.
Oh, well, we got 2099. Like, let's go. Like, I want more Spider-Man 2099. Like,
Absolutely. I think I'm with you. The first half of the game I played mostly in that one because that suit is amazing.
Yep.
But the last half, I actually was a little surprised at myself. The one that I found myself wearing the most because I thought it looked the coolest was actually the Prowler suit. And like I saw pictures of it before I played through it, and I was like, yeah, it's all right. It's pretty cool. But like the more I wore that, the purple and like the neon green looks so good together.
Oh yeah.
It looks so good.
Like, I think that's what a lot of, like, you can't really go wrong on any. All the suits look good.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's why I feel like I switched in and out of suits way more often on this one than I did even on the first Spider-Man game.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of that is Miles is still that new enough thing and not as established that you're like, oh, yeah, let's try this different stuff. Whereas you get some of that nostalgia with the first Spider-Man, you're like, I want actual Spider-Man suit. Like,
yeah, exactly. Well, you know what I'm excited for in my remastered playthrough too? Because they added a bunch of suits in the past year. They've added the Amazing Spider-Man suit, which is an amazing suit, actually. Movies, Suit.
The suit is fantastic.
Suit is fantastic. And they added, I believe this is right after Far From Home came out, but they added one of the either Far From Home or Homecoming suits that Tom Holland wears too. And that was a while ago now, but they added some pretty cool stuff. So excited to play through that again.
Definitely.
As well. All right, so moment of truth, Zane. We're going to give our rating now. If you guys haven't heard our rating or aren't familiar with our rating system, we played that at the beginning. We rate on a scale of 6 Infinity Stones. So, Zane, what is your rating of Spider-Man Miles Morales?
Oh, I mean, it's a 6 out of 6. There's no way it could be anything less. Even as I was playing through it, I was like, you could never put it lower than that first Spider-Man game. I was like, I don't think I could put it higher, but at the same time, you're just like, I don't need to put it higher. These set the bar. Yeah, the first one, fantastic. The second one comes on, and it matches that. And so now it's not necessarily higher. They've set the bar. Yeah. They both matched it. Both are 6 out of 6 to me.
Yep. Well, Zane, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I am not giving this a 6 out of 6. I'm giving it a 5.999 repeating out of 6.
Okay, Max.
For that one reason only. Yeah, Max did mention that he gave it a 5.9 as well. For that one reason only is that when I got done with this game, I wanted more. I felt like I wasn't satisfied with the amount of Spider-Man I got, and I knew going into it that it was short. I understand that. But I don't know. I felt like there was something missing, and it wasn't the story. The story was amazing, but it just needed to be just a tiny bit longer. Maybe throw in a couple more villains, and it was fantastic either way. But I couldn't give it a 6 out of 6 just for that reason. But man, fantastic game though. Obviously, we're both super pumped for the future of Insomniac Spider-Man universe and gaming. And do you think, Zane, that we'll ever get... we already kind of had Avengers, which Square Enix, came out with last year. But do you think we'll get another game that is not Spider-Man related by Insomniac at any point? A different superhero in the Spider-Man universe?
Maybe. I guess anything's possible. I just at this point I just don't see the reason why. You're killing it with Spider-Man, you're knocking it out of the park. Yeah, let's just keep going with that.
Yeah. And a small studio like Insomniac, now they have Sony backing too, but I'm sure they can't focus on so many projects. So
right.
So hey, if it's gonna detract anything from Spider-Man, don't do it.
Right. Just focus on Spider-Man. That's it. That's what the people want.
Focus on Spider-Man. That's what the people want. That's what the people want. Yeah, I agree. Well, Zane, it has been a fun-filled episode full of Spider-Man. Anything you want to say to the Infinity Brews universe before we close out here?
No, just thanks for listening. Our mini-sode ended up running an hour. But
it's not a mini-sode
not really
anymore.
A mini-sode anymore.
It's basically a full episode.
Pretty much.
All right. Well, yeah. Wherever you're listening, however you're listening, thank you so much for making us a part of your day. You can listen to the Infinity Bros podcast on any major podcast platform. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube. Guys, thank you so much for sticking with us through this very long mini-sode. It has been a blast. Zane, thank you so much for being with me on this mini-sode.
Absolutely. Always a good time.
And Infinity Bros universe. With great power comes great responsibility. Remember that, always. We love you 3000. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Infinity Bros podcast. You can find the Infinity Bros on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube at The Infinity Bros. You You can also check out our website at www.theinfinitybros.com. Feel free to send listener feedback via email at infinitybrospodcast@gmail.com.